Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. Spring is a busy time for everybody, including Dan and I. So we hope that you enjoy this rerun back from 2016, where we're going to talk about turf grass, and also another flash from the past from the Ag Minute back in 2014. We hope you enjoy them, and we'll catch you on the next time around.
Welcome to Ag Minute. Weed encroachment is a symptom of a larger problem in pasture management. Instead of focusing on removing weeds, adjust your management. When grazing, be sure to leave enough leaf area and allow sufficient time between defoliations to restore the plant's food reserves. Removing the leaves through grazing also reduces root growth. Since new leaf growth must depend on stored carbohydrates in the roots, maintaining more leaf area per rotation means grasses will tolerate more frequent defoliation. Remember, grazing height requirements vary by species. When haying, don't allow your hay to get so tall that it shades out the base of the plant. Harvest first cut hay when the grass is in the late boot to early head reproductive stage.
Biggest question out there right now that I'm getting, Karen, I don't know about you, lawn care and soil tests. I'll tell you what, I probably had a good 13, 14 soil tests this week. So people are out there listening and getting their soil tests in, which is great. Great news.
Yeah, that is great news. Knowing what your lawn or garden or farm needs before you put those expensive amendments on the ground, it's a really important step to not only saving your pocketbook, but also to protecting the health of our streams and lakes.
Right. Last week we did talk about pumpkins. This week, I think we should talk about America's number one crop.
Oh, yes. Our number one crop, the crop that is grown more frequently than anything else in our country, and that would be
lawn.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, it is what it is. You know, the lawn, just like we landscape our homes, the lawn's always part of the landscape and it needs to be taken care of. I mean, we have soil tests specifically designed for that. And if it wasn't for the turf science at OSU, then that would be a huge chunk of the horticulture program out of the College of Ag, No, but it's a huge deal. I mean, so much for professional, as in golf courses, and, for the homeowners. But it does require nutrients.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of people don't really consider is the nutrients that the lawn uses. It is a crop because it is something that you are taking off. Whenever you mow the lawn, you are harvesting part of that crop. And especially if you're using a bagging mower, you are taking away a lot of the nutrients from that ground. Mulching mowers, you're taking a little bit less away, but it still has to decompose, and you still have to have the pieces small enough to be able to decompose back into the soil. And so there is a time lag. And so fertilizing is an important part of a healthy lawn care regime.
Right. So let's try to figure out what's going on right now with the grasses, right? Most of the grasses around here, we grow a lot of fescue and Kentucky bluegrasses, and the turf variety, in our lawns.
Yeah, depending on whether you have a full sun or a full shade lawn is going to affect what kind of grass you can grow well.
Absolutely. There's different mixtures. And also depending on the drainage and how much drought tolerance a certain grass can tolerate. But like you were saying, it does require nutrients. And at this point, what's going on with the grasses is since they are cool season grasses, they do like to grow when it's nice and cool and rainy. So right now they're just growing like crazy. Like I can't believe how fast my grass has grown this past week.
That's right. It's growing really fast right now, and it's, naturally tuned to grow really fast right now because what it's trying to do is get enough leaf surface area so that it can feed itself well enough to produce a good seed head, because that's what all things in the world want to do, and that's reproduce.
So let's think about this. You're absolutely right. So this plant, it's already actively growing. It's been dormant for a while. Hopefully, you left it alone in the wintertime and gave it some good growth, and it's kind of trying to get some of those root reserves, but it's trying to make a seed. It wants to reseed itself. this life cycle of plants. So it's going from vegetative and it wants to hit that reproductive stage. So right now, if you were to put down a lot of nitrogen, and we'll talk about some of the rates in a minute, but if you were to put down some nitrogen right now, the plant will just want to use it up, bolt it up for seeds, and it won't be as utilized as it would be later on in after Memorial Day, June, July, or late in the fall when we're trying to get some of that root regrowth. So, looking at the OSU recommendations, we're recommending a lower rate, if at all. I mean, if you're only going to fertilize twice, we're recommending not doing it right away.
Yeah, fertilizing in the spring is sort of like, I don't know, giving an extra vitamin to something that really doesn't need the vitamin, because when grass is growing as fast as it is, adding some nitrogen on top of it is just going to make it grow even faster. And when something's growing super duper fast because of a nitrogen boost, sometimes you can actually have some detrimental effects. So if the plant is focusing solely on that leaf production, it's going to discount some other more important aspects of the plant, like the roots. So the roots are really, you're going to be your most important part of your lawn. And it's really the part that's most neglected. So how do you get a good root crop on your lawn?
So we were talking about soil testing. First, make sure that all the other nutrients are there. Typically, we recommend when you're putting the optimal amount of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, which would be a 30 by 30. I mean, not a very big area that we're talking about, All right, so I think Karen was just doing the math in her head. 33 by 33.
That's better.
but not a huge area.
Right.
And, up to 1 pound of actual nitrogen, which is on the high end. Even, what we were saying about, maybe not overdoing the nitrogen early on, maybe a half a pound would suffice for now. And then after Memorial Day, after the seed's already gone through its reproductive cycle, or the grass has gone through its reproductive cycle and sended up that seed head, then you're good. I mean, it's going to do that once, maybe twice, but once for sure early on, and then later on, it should stay vegetative.
All right, so you said something that I think we need to go into a little bit more detail on, and that is 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet.
Right.
So what's actual nitrogen mean?
All right, so when we buy fertilizer, this is kind of speaking broad terms. By fertilizer, we typically have them categorized in various numbers. Anything from like a 10.64.
Right, yeah, there's always those 3 numbers on the bag,
like
right?
A 15.33, a 35.55, 35.410, right? Especially for lawns. For lawns, like we see those ratios.
Right.
Well, shouldn't say that. We see those numbers, right? And those numbers should represent percentages. Well, they do represent percentages. I can't talk today. But yeah, those numbers are percentages of nitrogen, right? So
The first number is the percentage of nitrogen. So it's NPK,
yes,
right?
NPK.
Nitrogen,
Karen,
phosphorus,
I'm so
and
glad you're here.
potassium. And so our first number is the one we're focusing on right now. So the first number on that bag is the nitrogen that's in that fertilizer.
So for simplicity's sake, let's just go with 1 pound, right?
Okay.
So let's say we get this 10.64, and as of now, we're ignoring the P and the K.
Gotcha.
We're focusing on N.
Right.
And let's just say that we have this 32 by 33 perfect lawn, and we want to put exactly 1 pound of actual nitrogen on.
Okay.
Okay. So we got this bag of 10.64. Let's say it's a 5 pound bag. Is that going to be enough, Karen, or should I buy 2 bags? Well, Karen just said I should probably buy 2 bags.
Yeah.
10% of 10 pounds is 1 pound. So when we talk about 1 pound of actual nitrogen, in that 1,000 square foot area, it's going to take me 10 pounds of that 10.64 fertilizer to put 1 actual pound of nitrogen on the area. Does that make sense?
And so why is it like that? Why can't you just buy a 1 pound bag of fertilizer and put it out and be done? Is there like other stuff?
So we talk about these elements in terms of the actual element itself, but these elements come in different compounds. So there are things like urea, and there are things like nitrates, ammonium, and we have those other molecules there. Plus we have the filler in there.
And that filler
It's
is going to
not-
help it spread more evenly, right?
And it's going to weigh it down. Right, exactly. And it's a lot easier to manage. And it won't burn the grass all, in case you dump it all in one place.
So basically, I think where we're going is just because it's got other stuff in it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's differently applied. So if you have a bag of, what was your ratio that you used before?
This one was a 10-6-4.
A 10-6-4. And say we have a 10-pound bag of it. Okay. And we need to fertilize our 1,000 square foot lawn. So a 10-pound bag, you take 10% of that because that's your first number. And 10% of 10, just move that decimal point back one, you get 1 pound. So that 10-pound bag of a fertilizer with 10 as the first number is going to give you 1 pound of your nitrogen, and that's what you want.
Right. Let's just kind of complete that. And when you're doing a 10-6-4 and you have 10 pounds of it, you're also putting down 6 pounds of phosphorus. Oh, 0.6. Right. Sorry.
It's all right.
0.6 pounds. Exactly.
We'll get you there.
But here's the other example. Let's say, so there's a 1933 that's out there. So this one's going to have 20% nitrogen, right?
Right. So just round it up to 20.
And if you're sitting at the store and you're, if you have some time, crunch the numbers a little bit and figure out which one's the best bargain.
Yeah, a calculator is handy at the store before you buy it. Because if you buy something that has a lot of filler in it, and you're going to need to buy more quantity. So just because it's a bigger bag doesn't mean it's a better buy.
Right. Well, yeah, because let's say that 10-6-4 is $10, and then that 1933 is $17. Well, that 1933 is a better deal because it's going to take 1.5 bags or 1 bag as opposed to, if we're talking 10-pound bags, as opposed to the 5-pound bag. But if you're able to calculate the number, you are more likely able to figure out what the best bargain is. So yeah,
right.
So if the 10-6-4 is $10, and you need 2 bags of that to get that 1 pound, and that's $20. Now, if the 1933 is $17, you just need 1 bag of it.
Yeah, that's right. And so cost-wise, that's definitely something to pay attention to. But there's also something else you need to pay attention to, and that's what kind of nitrogen is in the bag. One of the common nitrogen supplements we find is ammonium sulfate, and it's a great nitrogen resource. However, it does acidify your soil. So if you are trying to add lime to improve your pH and make it less acidic, then you're adding ammonium sulfate, you're actually working against yourself because the ammonium sulfate will counteract your lime and make your soil more acidic. So if you have a highly acid soil, say you're down below 6, you definitely want to stay away from the ammonium sulfate unless you're trying to grow blueberries or something.
Yeah, and and if we're really talking about liming, that liming is something that's more optimally done in the fall.
Yes.
So that it can overwinter, because it does interact with nitrogen specifically. So you can lose some nitrogen if you put them too close.
Right, so you don't want to fertilize and lime at the same time.
Well, when we say fertilize with nitrogen specifically, absolutely.
Okay. All right, so now pH is something that we need to pay attention to in our lawns too. One of the calls I get, or complaints about lawns I get a lot, is I don't have grass, I have moss. Okay, and so moss does prefer a more acidic soil. However, more than pH, it's going to be your drainage. And so if you have a problem in your lawn, throwing seed and fertilizer on it might not fix your problem. It might simply be a drainage issue, and that you need to look at what kind of soil you have. And so one of the things you want to consider is texture of your soil. Is it sandy? Is it loamy? Is it clayey? So clay is that kind of thick, sticky stuff that if you get it wet and squish it into a ball, you can rub it through your fingers, you can form a little ribbon out of it. Sandy, it's going to be rough and coarse. It's not really going to want to stay in that ball. And loamy, somewhere in between the two.
Yeah, and we're typically at that loamy clay.
Yeah, that clay loam.
The clay loam.
Yeah, and that's most common in our area. And depending on how sticky your soil is, will tell you how much clay you have in your soil. And that's an important indicator too, because on that soil test, we give you a result about the cation exchange capacity. Okay?
What?
So basically what that means is, say you're making some tea and you're using some really bitter tea leaves. You need to add more sugar to counteract the bitterness of the tea than you would if you were using a sweeter tea leaf. It's the same thing with your soil. If you have a high clay capacity soil, you're going to need to add more lime or fertilizer to get it to make an adjustment. Okay, so basically you need to fill all the seats at the table in order for there to be a change that happens. If you have clayey soil, you are going to expect to need to apply more fertilizer or lime to get the same adjustment that you would get in a more sandy soil. So knowing your soil texture, that is definitely going to have an impact on how much fertilizer you need to buy and apply.
And lime.
Lime.
And the wonderful thing about a soil test is they take the cation exchange capacity in account when they give you the liming and the nitrogen recommendations.
Right. And so that is why it's best not to guess. Get a soil test.
Yeah. And, and I'll tell you what, you think you know your soil, but I sit down when people bring me 3 samples, because you have to make sure that you're getting a representative sample. And, I sit with them and they watch me label it, put it in a specific bag, put it all together. Because when we get the results, sometimes they're like, no, I think you got these 2 mixed up. And I didn't, because we sat down together. We were very diligent and, marking the bags and showed them the number, gave them a copy, and it is what it is. So, people, as much as they think they know what's going on, sometimes it'll surprise you.
Yeah, and the thing is, too, when you are initially amending a field, you're going to want to go in and soil test every year until you get it to where you want it to be. Once you get it stabilized at the point where you want it to be, then you can do your soil test every 3 years. But that's really what we recommend is every 3 years you should be doing a soil test at the minimum, because you need to understand how that soil is changing over time depending on what you're doing in the soil.
And more specific time, because you're going to have fluctuations in things like potassium at various times of the year. This initial growth that the grass is doing, they're sucking up that potassium. So when you were actually trying to calculate how sufficient your amendments were, make sure you're staggering them at the equal times too, at the same time of the year, because you're going to get some fluctuations in certain minerals at different times of the year.
Yeah, and also keep in mind that when you're doing a soil test and we're giving you a nitrogen recommendation, it's not that we are measuring the amount of nitrogen in the soil, but we're measuring the amount of nitrogen that your proposed crop is going to need. And so if you're growing grass or hay, you're going to need a higher nitrogen amount than, say, you're growing tomatoes. So different plants have different nitrogen requirements. And when we do a soil test, we are testing for things like calcium and magnesium and pH, things like that. But we are not testing the soil itself for nitrogen because it's very hard to measure in the soil. If you are having a problem with your crop and you suspect that you have a nitrogen deficiency, it's much more efficient to do a leaf tissue sample for nitrogen. So if you're growing something, a high-value fruit crop or something like grapes, you want to do a meristem and tissue sample early in the spring to ensure that you do have the right amounts of those micronutrients.
But I always say, worry about the macros first.
Or worry about the macros and your pH, and you're halfway there, or even 3/4 of the way there a lot of times.
I'm going to back up to what you're saying about the moss. So let's think about moss for a minute. Moss. So, your grass isn't growing, but the moss is there. Right. Moss, it doesn't mind the acid, but moss actually doesn't have true roots. So it doesn't need topsoil at all. So, when you're talking about soil types, make sure that if you have a very rocky yard and you're wondering why the grass isn't growing, sometimes you might need to put in some topsoil, because moss doesn't require soil and it does need a very wet environment. So drainage could be the issue, but there are certain places around here that really don't have that much topsoil. And, there are certain yards that I've visited that, they actually need some topsoil.
Yeah, and so just because there's dirt on your lawn doesn't mean you have topsoil. Topsoil is highly organic. There's a lot of microbial activity that occurs in topsoil, which helps translate those rocky mineral nutrients into something that a plant can use. And so if you don't have good topsoil, this happens a lot in new construction sites. You've just built a home and they have seeded your lawn, but it just won't take. Probably what happened was when they scraped off the topsoil, they left it in the back of a truck somewhere and sold it to somebody and left you with some subsoil.
Wow.
Or perhaps it's just sitting in a pile on the neighbor's yard and didn't get properly spread back.
Yeah, I mean, or for whatever reason, or it could have eroded.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's just...
And if there's a lot, like last year when there was a lot of rain, a lot of topsoil from construction sites was washing down in the creeks and down our streets. So you need to watch that too.
Yeah, so if you're out there with a soil probe and it's very rocky, it's highly compacted, it might not have that much topsoil in it. And if you think about the organic matter, that's going to act like a very springy material. So your topsoil should be soft. Shouldn't be too rocky. And especially with the new homes and everything, a lot of times if you have a lot of moss growing, it's just there's not that topsoil there. And grass and most flowering plants and monocots and everything that we're more familiar with, what we think of in terms of plants, I put that in quotes, need that topsoil. They need anything that has a nice deep root needs that topsoil. Moss doesn't have a root system. It can grow on rocks, but it needs high moisture. So, moss might also be an indicator that you're lacking in topsoil. So just keep that in mind too.
Yeah. And so if you are lacking in topsoil, you can put as much fertilizer as you want on that lawn and nothing is going to change because there's no place for the roots to really go.
And that's where composting can come in and you can start building it up. But, you might actually need to purchase some topsoil in that case and maybe even sod your lawn.
Yeah. And so for new construction sites, we always recommend that you request about 2 inches of compost to be mixed in with the topsoil that they're leaving behind because that will help remediate any of the issues with topsoil being eroded during the construction process. Another thing to consider is when it was seeded. If the seed was put on in December, now this winter was a little weird, so we had a lot of really warm days, so seed may have taken, but typically when you're seeding in a cooler time of year, your seed's not going to take as well, so you may need to go back and reseed.
Or in the summer.
Or in the summer, when it's dry.
Yeah, and then those annual weed grasses will come in, and that's not going to make for a desirable lawn.
Right. And so we had talked earlier, we just went from dry. I want to go back to wet if we can for a little bit. We had talked about, it's raining in the spring, and one of the things that homeowners often do, and farmers often do, is they accidentally compact their soil. And this happens a lot when things are actively growing and you need to get out there and keep things trimmed and cut.
And it's raining.
And so what happens when the soil is saturated, it compacts together when you run a machine over it. And that machine can simply be a small lawnmower with the vibration of that motor will over time compact your lawn. And also those big tractors out there, there's a lot of weight on those tires. And that is the number one cause of subsoil compaction is when you take a tractor out on wet soil, it pushes the soil down underneath. So keep that in mind and have fun out there. Enjoy the spring and take care of your soil.
Yeah. And for seeding recommendations, you can call the Extension office.
This is Karen Cox with the Ag Minute. Soft spots can quickly develop in fields where water pools and become especially dangerous. Use these safety tips from OSU's Extension Service. When you're out on the tractor, watch carefully for obstructions and depressions. Handle the rig slowly. Avoid quick starts, stops, and turns. Ballast and width help prevent rollovers. Use wheel weights and adjust the width of the tractor as wide as practical or possible. Drive uphill with bucket lowered and drive downhill backwards with a load. Keep your speed down. Being in a hurry only causes mistakes. Keep away from the outer edge of banks and slopes. And remember that farm equipment is dangerous and not a place for children. Too many children are injured from harmless rides. Passengers are not okay on heavy equipment. Round bales should not be handled without appropriate attachments such as bale forks or spears. and never exceed the weight limitations. Carry the bale slowly and as low as possible to the ground. When handling round bales on a slope, always approach the bale with a tractor facing uphill. Never use a tractor to stop a rolling bale. It's cheaper to lose a bale than a tractor, and it's better to lose a bale than your health. This is Karen Cox with the Ag Minute.
Hey friends, we need your help. In order to help keep this show going, we need to hear back from you. Please take some time and check out our evaluation. You can either contact us directly for a copy, or you can go online to https://bit.ly/ here's the tricky part. Capitalize the next 3 words. Extension, calling, evaluation. Again, extension, calling, and evaluation all need to be capitalized. So bit.ly/extension, calling, evaluation. Give us your thoughts. Let us know if you like the show, and especially let us know if you've used any of the information you've gained from our show. Once again, you can reach us directly. You can call Karen at 304-234-3673. That's 304-234-3673. Or you can reach Dan at 740-695-1455. That's 740-695-1455. Let us know how you use the information that you get from this show, whether it is change in your shopping habits, a change in your gardening, or simply just expanding your mind. We want to know. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.